All right, we've been studying about Abraham. We'll continue that. Again, I want to go back to chapter 12. This is the foundation passage about Abraham.
Well, we're turning, he's a junior. He's a James junior.
Okay. Genesis chapter 12, where we first meet Abram. And the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Verse 2, I will make you a great nation. Where do you have to start to have a great nation?
Child.
Got to have a child. And we need to get that child born this morning. So turn to chapter 21. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, "God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me." She also said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age." So finally, we get there. Isaac is born. And this is chapter 21. What is shocking is what we come to in chapter 22. And by the way, this is about approximately 15 years after Isaac was born. So Isaac's probably around 15 years old. We read in chapter 22, "Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' Then he said, 'Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you.'" Now, if you were Abraham, what would you be thinking?
What?
Yeah. What is this? How could this be? What? I mean, you'd probably you couldn't even believe that God would have said this, to go kill your son as a sacrifice. And I'm sure that all of us, just like Abraham, just couldn't hardly take in, why would God do this? Why would God ask me to do this? In the verses we just read, what's the answer?
It was a test.
It was a test. Y'all see that in verse 1? Came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. And that leads, what kind of a test? Testing for what? Yeah. Okay, I heard to see if he would obey, to see if he would be faithful. Those are good answers. We'll find out what God's answer is shortly, but that's good what you said. We could keep reading, and that would be good, but I ran across this film years ago that really touched my heart. It's incredibly done, where they act out the verses that we would read, but it's going to be on the screen. So I want you to watch this film with me of what happens next.
Avi.
Ineni, Benny.
إنها عاش في حادثي وهي حسن ليولا.
Elohim. Ya Elo. Say hello, Benny. Adonai.
Well, that was dramatic, wasn't it? But that's probably just about exactly like it was. And it's just hard to, that helped me a lot to see that. I hope it was helpful to you. All right. I want you to look with me at chapter 22 where we started, and maybe I'll just read through the scriptures and of what we just saw. Starting in verse 1. It came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah, offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place far off. And Abraham said to his young men, which, by the way, I don't think they were in the film, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father? And he said, Here I am, my son. Then he said, Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the 2 of them went together. They came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord will provide. It is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. All right, did you pick up what it was that God was looking for from Abraham when he tested him?
Fear.
You got it. I heard good answers earlier, obedience and faithfulness, but God says that the test was to see if Abraham would fear God.
How is that different from faith?
Well, it's related to faith, but it's a little more specific. Let me try to answer that. Maybe you've been to church or Bible study or somewhere where you've heard suggestions of what it means to fear God. Have you heard any teaching on or suggestions on what preachers or theologians today say it means to fear God?
Most of it has to do with ultimate respect.
Respect. Yeah.
Trust,
Trust in God.
reverence, awe.
Yeah. These are the words I wrote down because I was taught this, and many of you may have been too, maybe you haven't, but to fear God means to respect God, to reverence God, to be in awe of God. Why would people be comfortable with those terms rather than the word fear?
Fear we tend to think of as afraid,
Yeah?
which wouldn't have anything to do with faith.
Got more of a that's got a negative connotation. The other ones have more of a positive,
Yeah.
You want to have to respect God. He's deserving of it after all he's done. And
Yeah.
he loves us, and we need to respect that.
Yeah, I agree, and it suggests that certainly God doesn't want us to be afraid of Him, but He does want us to respect Him and honor Him and reverence Him. And that sounds good, except I spent a lot of hours one day studying the word fear in the Bible. There's 400 uses. Over 400 times the word fear is used in the Bible. And I quickly, I didn't look them all up, but I read every line in the concordance, and I could tell from the context line in the concordance what the way fear was being used in all 400 instances. And I came to a very firm conclusion as to what the word fear means. Can you guess?
Fear means scared.
It means fear. It's one of the saddest things that theologians and preachers have tried to explain it away or say it means this, when it means this, fear. To fear God means to fear God. To fear God means to be afraid of God. How can we explain? How can we be comfortable with that?
Well, fear is healthy for you. I mean, it keeps you from doing stupid things. The body itself fears certain things and will keep you from keep itself protected. I don't know if that's along the lines of what you're.
No, it's a very good answer. Now you're changing respect is involved,
Yes.
but I want us to stick with the word fear because that's the word. And Bill gave a good answer. It's healthy to fear some things.
Well, in James, it talks about a premature death for a Christian that continues in sin. So fear of God of a continual sin,
Yeah,
He can prematurely take our lives.
yeah,
You ever fear your dad? What are you going to do to you if you did the wrong?
yeah,
Did you ever, you didn't behave like Bill's saying, because you knew what your dad is going to happen to you.
Yes.
And
And-
God gave him a command, an instruction. To disobey would take a lot of cojones to disobey God. Fear would drive you to obey.
Yes. Very good.
I know for me personally, my father died when I was very young, so I grew up without a father, and I've never been a father. And so my father concept is really weak. And now that I've stepped off, I've become prodigal in my Christian life. And I'm not blaming it on God at all, but because I didn't have much of a father concept, I just did stupid things. I know what Wes was saying, that thing about your mother would tell you, well, just wait till your father comes home, you're gonna get it, you know, and so you lived in fear until he came home. I don't know if that's a healthy kind of fear, but that's maybe just channeling it into somebody else, but I have often thought that I could have been kept from a lot of stupid things if I had been responsible, knowing that my father was coming home. I don't know if that.
No, I think father is a good, obviously God's a father. He's Abraham's father. He's your father. And all of us have a father. Some of us maybe didn't even know our father, or maybe he wasn't a very involved father, but a lot of us had a father that we feared. Or if you have children, I'll ask this. If you have children, did you want your children to fear you?
Yeah.
I did. I wanted to be afraid when I said, don't do that, or this is going to happen. What was it that I wanted them to fear about me? My discipline. But that didn't mean that I wanted them to that their only emotion toward me is fear, obviously. That was just one side of the relationship. On the other hand, how would I balance? How would you balance?
Love them.
Yeah, love.
Care for them.
Yeah, unconditional love. I'll love you no matter what. That you never should fear that I'll quit loving you. In other words, it's what about me do I want them to fear? I don't want them to fear everything about me, but there's one thing about me that I want them to fear, and that's discipline. But I never want them to fear that I'll stop loving them, ever. That I want them to know that you couldn't do anything to make me stop loving you, caring about you. I'll always love you, I'll always care about you, always want the best for you. But I do want you to fear my discipline. That's healthy. That's healthy. And some of us had fathers like that, some of us didn't. Some of us had fathers that were out of balance, one way or the other. They were too negative and not positive. Other fathers are so positive that they don't discipline. And that's very harmful to a child as well. God's a perfect father. And certainly, he wanted Abraham to know that he loved him no matter what. But he also wanted Abraham to fear. And so what was it that Abraham feared in this moment? Let's deal with the word fear. We know that Abraham was ready to offer Isaac because he feared God. What was it about God that he would have been afraid of? Okay. And I agree. What specific things would Abraham in particular fear if he didn't do this?
Whatever discipline he decided to give him.
Losing the promise.
Losing the promise. Will I still have a nation? Will God still follow through on the blessing that he promised to give to my son and my grandchildren? If I don't do what God tells me to do, will I miss out on the blessing that God, you know, wants to give me.
His only son, too, so
Yeah,
Abraham's heritage right there, if you didn't know.
yeah,
And that raises a good, using CB's word respect. Without fear in a relationship, you can't have a relationship. If your child is always in your face and confrontational, you don't have a good relationship.
exactly. Skip down to, I think my question is answered starting in verse 15. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is of the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of your enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." And Abraham was afraid that if he didn't do what God said, he wouldn't receive the blessing that God had for him. And here God confirms it, right? God said, okay, because you've passed the test, I'm going to bless you in the way that I promised.
Mine has up there where he says, and because you've done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing. Mine has son and blessing hyphenated there. It says, you have not withheld your son, your only blessing. I will bless you and multiply. Your son hyphenated blessing is called mine. I don't know if it's just the
I think that dash, if I remember from my grammar, it's called an M dash, and I think it just means it's a pause. And it just means because you've not withheld your only son, pause. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants.
So we're saying that Abraham was fearful that God wouldn't follow through with what he had told him back in previous chapters that we read. When
Yeah.
he was 15, that's when he believed in Jesus for eternal life. And he took him outside and showed him the stars, said, I'm going to make your descendants more numerable than that. And that was impressive. And
Yeah.
but now we're saying he was fearful that God wasn't going to honor that.
Yeah.
I thought there was some place where it said that Abraham believed God and that he would give him another son, or he would bring Isaac back to life. Wasn't there a verse in there?
Yeah, hold on to that. That's a good thought. If I had to give a bottom line on this, I think that he feared what would happen if he didn't obey God. That's what he was afraid of. I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't obey God.
He had seen it in previous, with Sodom and Gomorrah and all that, so he'd seen God's anger and saw how he handled it. I'm sure he recognized disobedience.
Yeah, and I appreciate what Bill just said, because we skipped a number of chapters about his nephew Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah and the wrath of God, and Abraham was a witness to all of that. Next week we're going to come back and study Lot, but I wanted to finish Abraham. But that's important what Bill said, is Abraham had reason to fear God because of what he saw God do in relation to Sodom and Gomorrah and his nephew Lot. He knew God meant business. That's a good point.
Is it important when he tells the two servants that he brought with him, wait here and we will come back? Or does he think he was just lying to them, not to tip his hand, so to speak? Or
Yeah, and I skipped that, but that's good. Why would he say to the servants, we will return to you? What was he thinking? Yeah, hold on to that thought. We're going to get the clear answer on that in a moment as to what exactly Abraham was thinking. We know for sure that he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't obey God. He was afraid of missing out on the blessing and that Isaac would miss out on the blessing. And I think the application to us this morning, we'll repeat it later, is we need to fear what will happen if we don't obey God. That's a healthy fear. And I have that fear. I'm asking, do you have that fear? I mean, are there times where you say, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I don't obey God? That's a very healthy fear. And that's what, to me, that's the application that we need to take to heart from this story. I need to be afraid of God. I need to fear what will happen if I don't obey God.
Well, we looked at that from Romans chapter 1, that the wrath of God is real, and it can be visited upon us, especially if we take the attitude of, it's going to be okay, and I'm going to do this because my flesh wants it, and we don't have that healthy fear, then that can visit us.
Exactly.
And that's for believers and non-believers alike.
Exactly.
Well, I can remember my mother, when I had done something wrong, the way she disciplined me was, if you don't do whatever, then I'm going to put the fear of God in you. And that stuck with me, and now I know what she was talking about.
Okay. All right. Now, Bill brought up a good point. Why did Abraham say to the servants, who, again, they weren't in the film, but why did he say to them, we shall return to you? And we could guess, but we're given the clear answer in the book of Hebrews. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to look at verse 17, Hebrews 11, starting in verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be blessed. Concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So what was Abraham thinking when he had that knife up ready to bring it down and kill his son?
Even though he killed him, that God would raise him back up.
Yeah, that's what he was thinking. We didn't read that in Genesis, but it was implied when he said to the servants, we will come back to you. So when we put that together, again, what was he thinking?
God's gonna bring him back.
If I kill him, God's going to bring him back to life. It's right here. He concluded that God was able to raise him from the dead even if he killed him. Jack?
There's no mention of Sarai in all this. Did you just go to her and say, me and Isaac are having a guy's night out, rather than have that conversation with her about what he's thinking?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, would I have that conversation with my wife? Hey, here's what God told me to do.
Yeah, I don't know whether he told her or not. I suspect that he didn't. I'm not sure she would have been, she probably would have just stood in his path. I don't know. Of course, if she had faith, she would have let him go, but...
Well, that's a good example of not judging too early in the Bible when you read something, because if we stop there, it could seem like Abraham was lying to the men. He wasn't lying to the men. He was fully convinced God was going to bring him back down.
Yeah,
But we didn't find that out until Hebrews.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's implied in Genesis, but it's clearly stated in Hebrews that, and again, you know the answer. Why was Abraham convinced that God would raise him back from the dead?
Because he believed God's promise.
God made a promise. I mean, God couldn't keep his promise if Isaac was dead. I mean, this is the whole point, that God promised, I'm going to give you a nation through your son. And Isaac knew that, well, or Abraham knew if Isaac's dead, God can't keep his promise. So it wasn't blind faith or hope, guessing that God might do this. He knew God had to raise him from the dead because God has to keep his promise.
Do you think just before he was about to sacrifice him, it's just a thought that just hit me, that because it doesn't say anything about Isaac's emotions or responses, do you think he may have talked to him, and said, hey, this is what God's told me to do, and like in the film, he just did everything, didn't say anything. I would think he would have explained to him God's promise, or maybe he already knew it. I don't know.
Well, you're bringing up a great point. And even though it doesn't jump out at us, this story tells us a lot about Isaac. And Doug's got us down that track. This is not a child. This is you saw him in the film. He's a grown, big boy. I mean,
I thought it was a baby always when I first read that too.
Probably he was stronger than his dad. He could have resisted everything here. He could have said, I'm not doing that. So he knew what was going on here. It was obvious by the time, he didn't know it till he got up there. But when his dad, tied his hands and laid him on the altar, and he knew what was going on. So Doug, I appreciate Doug. What does this tell us about Isaac?
He had faith.
Huh?
He was obedient. He had faith.
He had faith too.
Yes.
He believed that God would raise him from the dead. Even if his father killed him, he believed that God would raise him from the dead. Of course, this leads us to say, what is this ultimately a picture of?
Christ.
God the Father and God the Son.
I thought
And that's
about
exactly what,
carrying the wood.
yeah,
The son carrying the wood, I thought of Jesus carrying his wood.
yeah,
And the third day, it mentions the third day.
uh-huh,
Maybe that's why the young men weren't invited. They might have tried to stop him from doing that.
yeah, yeah. Think he'd lost his mind,
Sure.
yeah,
I would.
yeah. Bill?
This might be a rabbit trail, and if it is, just say so, but in chapter 22, it says, this you've done, you've not withheld your son, your only son. A few weeks ago, we discussed that when Sarah and Hagar were having their debate, and you said that Abraham should have stepped in because Ishmael was his son. I'm sure the Ishmaelites don't like to read this, that when he says, this is your only son. But how does that, are those two conflicting thoughts, that this is your only son, and yet we've discussed that Ishmael was his son too?
Yeah. Well, he's the only son of promise. He's the only son that God ordained or commanded him to have. He didn't command him to have.
That's what God's saying here. He's
Yeah.
the only son of promise. Huh?
Yeah, that's, I think, the implied idea there.
That makes
It
sense to
actually
me.
came through Sarah.
Yeah,
The child had to come through Sarah.
child had to come through Sarah. What are some examples today of not fearing, of a Christian not fearing God, and what that Christian might do if he doesn't fear? What are some examples of things that Christians do because they don't fear God? Pardon?
Sinful life.
Sinful life. Yeah, that's the general answer.
Abortion comes to my mind.
Okay, why?
Murder.
Murder, yes, good.
Yeah. Not afraid of what will happen if I don't obey God. I just want to do it.
Divorce.
Sometimes divorce. Yep.
You can't go down the wrong trail
What?
simply by disobeying what the Lord says, and you go and do what you want to do.
Yeah, and I'm looking.
There are consequences.
Yeah, that's a good general answer, but I'm just trying to think of specific examples.
Not having that relationship, that everyday relationship.
Yeah, if I go a month without prayer, I should fear that. I should fear what's going to happen if I quit praying. I should be afraid of that. What's going to happen if I quit praying?
That brought to my mind of just falling away.
Yeah,
Not attending the Lord's Supper.
yeah. Or church, the way a person feels that God wants them to be involved in the lives of other believers. Which I fear what will happen if I don't have fellowship with other believers. If I quit praying.
When you go down that road, then you don't, your prayers don't even reach the ceiling because the Lord's not gonna answer them because you're out of fellowship.
Mhm.
And you have to,
Well, that's the fear, is fear of being out of fellowship with God. I fear what will happen if I'm not walking close to God.
I think the one that comes to my mind the quickest is adultery, because men have a strong fleshly nature geared that way, and if you don't fear God and the consequences of that choice, you could go there.
Yeah,
Many have.
yeah.
Well, I don't mean to refute you, but I worked in a matriarchal world pretty much in the hospital. I mean, 90% women. Men aren't the only ones who are enticed, I guarantee you.
Why?
Okay. But that's a good one. Fear what would happen if I don't obey God when it comes to my marriage and being faithful to my wife. How about if you're faithful to your wife? What is it that you still need to fear in terms of a marriage?
Not having that relationship with her above your relationship with God.
Well, that can happen.
Not being a head of the household, you're a leader.
Or lover. Let's start with lover and then leader. Yeah. Fear what will happen if I don't love my wife as Christ loved the church. If I don't put her first in my life in terms of the marriage. It's very, that gets down to pretty practical area, doesn't it? How about somebody does you wrong? What should you fear?
Don't forgive them. Not forgiving.
I fear what will happen if I don't forgive this person. Because what will happen if I don't forgive this person?
You will be bitter.
Yeah, God's not going to forgive me in terms of fellowship. What's that going to lead to? It's going to lead to a downward spiral in my life. I'd be afraid, need to be afraid of what's going to happen if I don't forgive this person. Because if I don't forgive, then I'm not obeying God. I need to fear that. I need to be afraid of what will happen if I don't obey God.
Aren't there some indulgences if you're driving I-20?
Yeah. Okay, so this could be applied in all kinds of ways, but I think that Abraham he kind of shouts to us, doesn't he?
Yeah.
About the importance of fearing God. Rick?
Yeah. On Abraham and his fear of God, when he left Ur, they told him to go to Ur, and he stopped. Did he not fear him then? Or did this is a learned?
Great question. What's the answer? When Abraham didn't go straight to Canaan, but he stayed in Haran. And why did he stay in Haran, by the way? You remember? Because of his father. Rick's question is, was he not fearing God?
He wouldn't have believed in God at that point.
Would have gone on if he feared God.
Yeah. Yeah, he was not fearing God in that moment.
You
Yeah.
can't have a PhD until first day in school.
That's right.
How about Moses, when he sees this burning bush, and just out of curiosity, because he's never seen a bush that is burning and it's not consumed by the fire, so he walks over just out of curiosity to see this strange thing. And then God says,
take your sandals off. You're in the presence of the Almighty God. You're on holy ground. Moses has never met God, but the next thing he does, I think it says, he hid his face from God. He was afraid to look.
Yeah.
But, you know, he didn't get a PhD on day one either, but he got a start.
I like what you're saying, and I like where Rick, Moses is a good example. But this all started when he hung out in Haran. We saw he wasn't fearing God then. When else did we see Abraham not fearing God?
He told Pharaoh that was his sister.
Yeah, he told Pharaoh, this is my sister. Instead of fearing what would happen if he, what should he have said? The truth, right? He's my wife. And he got in a mess there. We didn't study that passage. When else did we?
When he decided to go into Hagar.
Yeah. He didn't fear God when his wife came up with this terrible idea about sex with Hagar and having a child by her. And what did that lead to? Trouble. Lots of trouble.
Still trouble.
It's trouble today because of that. Abraham should have been afraid of what would happen if I don't obey God here. But he went through with that because he didn't fear God like he should have. But I think Barron's point's a very good one. By the time we get to chapter 22, Abraham's learned, I better fear God because I saw what happened when I didn't. These are great. I appreciate y'all bringing that out because it's very helpful to see that Abraham grew to fear God, even to the, probably you couldn't think of a greater example of fearing God. I couldn't, that you would actually be ready to obey God by killing your son. That is a doctorate, or what did you say? You don't get a doctorate first. What did you say? You don't get your degree the first day of class.
PhD.
Yeah, Abraham got the highest award, I think, here in Genesis 22. Let's pray.